and welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. You know what time it is. We got a really good, interesting show for you today. Definitely some that caught my attention, and look forward to discussing that with you. Going to talk some Draymond Green, NBA, and basically the international nature of the game now, basketball. But before we do that, you know what we got to do. If you haven't already, go ahead, click that subscribe, that like, and that notification bell here on YouTube. So can be a member of the channel, and you can be notified anytime new episodes come out and we drop new content. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, open your audio platform, type in the Format Podcast in the search bar, give us a little search. We should come up, and you can go ahead and subscribe there. Please, if you like the content, give us that 5-star review, and make sure you leave a comment either on your podcast platform or here on YouTube. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. All right, let's get to it. So, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that I listen regularly to the Draymond Green show. If you're not new to this channel, then you know that I have some philosophical differences with some of the things that he says as a podcaster, and especially in his stance on this old media versus new media. But that being said, it's not like he isn't, in some instances, pretty thoughtful and gives us some interesting things to consider. So the latest thing, he had No Chill Gil, and you know that's another guy I often disagree with is Gilbert Arenas. But you know, Gilbert Arenas doing his thing too, and you know, that's a former outstanding NBA player, but he's got some definitely some interesting thoughts as well that I'll respond to at different times, and I have. You can check previous episodes of the show. But Draymond was talking to Gilbert Arenas, and he brought up something interesting that I hadn't even considered before. And he basically says that he feels like European stars or foreign-born players in the NBA are not held to the same level of scrutiny in terms of winning championships that American stars are. So before we get going talking about it, let's go ahead and hear exactly what Draymond had to say. Check that out. We'll come back, and then we'll get into it.
Why does European players not get the same flack for winning championships or not than U.S. American-born guys? For instance, I saw a list today Stephen A. put out, and it was like the players with under the most pressure to win a championship. I think James Harden was 1, CP was 2. Jason Tatum was 3. Joker was 4. Joker has 2 MVPs. Joker has 2 MVPs. More than likely about to be a 3rd MVP.
Mm-hmm.
And he's older than JT.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that he's 4th, but JT's 3rd? And Luka wasn't even on the list, right? Now, obviously Luka's a little younger than JT, but I feel like over the years, European players has not had the same, caught the same flack of winning a championship as U.S. players, and I don't understand that. Now, these Europeans today, Luka, Joker, Giannis, although Giannis accomplished the feat, Joel, and Joel's African, but just, from another continent. These guys, they real guys, and they these guys are top 10 guys in our league. Majority of them top 5, but they top 10 guys in our league.
Yeah.
These guys are as good as anyone in the league, if not better.
Mm-hmm.
And if the thing is, it's a knock and we don't hold them to that standard, that got to go.
Now, this is actually a pretty interesting thought experiment, and so I'll give Draymond credit for this one. Because again, like I said, there's a lot of things that he says I don't necessarily agree with. But this actually I thought was pretty thought-provoking. His premise that he doesn't feel like the European stars are held to the same level of scrutiny, mainly in terms of not winning championships that American stars are. And it really got me to thinking. And so where do we start with this? So we know that basketball has been a global game for quite some time. Obviously, it really blew up overseas with the Dream Team in the '92 Olympics. Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, so on and so forth. Arguably the greatest basketball team ever assembled. Definitely, in my estimation, the greatest basketball team ever assembled. And if everybody on that team is healthy, they cannot be beaten. But different story. Maybe you argue Dream Team too. But anyway, so around that time, I mean, basketball had already been being played in Europe for quite some time, and even to a relatively high level. They had some really good players over there, but the problem is that most of the European powers at that time were Soviet bloc nations, so they couldn't export their players to get to the United States to play in the NBA or even the ABA, right? So there were a lot of really outstanding players that we didn't get to see in their prime. But with that said, we do also know that there have been a lot of really good European players in the NBA for a long time. You got your Vlade Divac, who played with the Lakers in the early to mid 90s. You got your Drazen Petrovic, who played with the Portland Trailblazers and then the New Jersey Nets, before tragically dying in an accident on the Autobahn, I think in either 92 or 93. You had your Arvydas Sabonis, who was widely considered the best player in Europe and one of the best players in the world, but we didn't get to see him in his prime. He didn't get to come over to the United States till much later. Then he played with the Blazers for a few years. So there have been some really outstanding players. Then there's some maybe names that are lesser known to some of the younger fans now. Your Sarunas Marciulionis, those kind of guys, really outstanding players, but they ended up being role players on the NBA front. Like, for instance, there's a story about Vlade Divac. And now, when he first came to the league, he was playing with the Lakers, and by that time, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had retired, and it was close to the end of Magic's first retirement. And I think it was his first practice. I heard Magic tell this story. It was Vlade's first practice, and the shot goes up, the shot's missed. Vlade grabs the rebound, pushes the rock all the way up the floor, dishes it off to somebody for a score. And Magic stops the practice and says, no. When you grab that rebound, you give it to me. I'm the point guard. I run the break. I bring up that story to say Vlade Divac was a solid 7-1, but being a European player and those guys getting all that skill development all the way around, he was able to be a guy who could grab the rebound, put it on the floor, pass it so he could handle, pass, all that. Kind of like a Jokic before Jokic, kind of along those Sabonis lines, et cetera, et cetera. So, the European guys have long been valued contributors in the NBA game. Drazen Petrovic was a guy who went right at Michael Jordan. He was one of the best players in Europe. The record, I think he's got the European record. He scored like 114 points in a game over there at some point. I mean, he would have been a really tremendous fit for the NBA today. He was a guy that was bombs away from long range. You look at your Tony Kukocs. The best analogy I can make for Tony Kukoc, for those who don't know, before Luka Doncic was Tony Kukoc. Tony Kukoc was widely regarded as the best player in Europe. He was getting busy doing his thing. He was doing his thing to the point that when the Dream Team played against Croatia, well, no, I guess it wasn't. Was it Croatia then? I think it was still Yugoslavia in the 92 Olympics before Yugoslavia split and became Serbia and Croatia. Anyway, that was another team that was loaded with guys who'd play in the NBA. It was Vlade, Drazen Petrovic, Tony Kukoc, Dino Raja, some really good players on that team. But anyway, Tony Kukoc was so well known in Europe and was such an outstanding player. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen were actually arguing over who is going to take him in the game and shut him down, which they definitely managed to do. So when Tony Kukoc finally came over here, he ends up playing for the Bulls. He's a really good six-man, outstanding player, right? So he's not able to walk into the league and dominate same way Luka did. And it's not because he wasn't as good a player. It's because the league was so different then, and the learning curve, mainly the physicality and the defense, was on such a higher level from what the European players were used to. It took them a few years to get used to it on the NBA level. Anyway, so these guys have long been stars. Then you move forward, you got your Peja Stojakovic's, you have your Dirk Nowitzki, who is probably arguably the most well-known European player, and maybe to this point the best European player in NBA history. Now that's probably going to change pretty soon here, because you've got your Giannis, you've got your Luka, you've got your Jokic, so that's probably going to change. But back to Draymond's point, and this was so interesting when he says that he believes European players and European superstars are not held to the same standard, or not dug into the same way when they don't win championships. Now, it was an interesting thought, but I have to disagree, right? Because look at Giannis. After Giannis won his MVP, he had already won a Defensive Player of the Year. He hadn't won a championship yet, and at that point, if you're into the sports media, the NBA media, etc., you started to hear it. Okay, Giannis needs to win now. Giannis needs to win now. Giannis needs to win now. He picked up his game. He eventually won. And quick side note, I have so much respect for the way Giannis did it. Stayed in the small market, didn't sell out to go join a super team, carried his team by himself. Now, yes, some people are going to argue he got some luck on the way with Kevin Durant maybe needing a half-size smaller shoe, and that's all she wrote. But at the same time, every champion gets a little bit of luck on their way, right? So anyway, Giannis finally won, but they were really starting to kind of weigh on him and put the pressure on him, like, okay, you've done this, you're defensive player of the year, you're a former MVP, we've seen you develop, you have to win now, right? And Giannis was able to do that. He did it. Okay, so before even Giannis, though, I think the biggest one was Dirk Nowitzki, another guy who won an MVP, but kind of sometimes he would have one of the best teams in the league. He gets knocked out in the first round. Sometimes he goes to the conference finals, he loses. He goes to the NBA finals, I want to say 2006 against the Shaq and Dwayne Wade Miami Heat. They lose, right? And so for years, it was like, Dirk, when are you going to get over the hump? When are you going to get over the hump? When are you going to get over the hump? You got to get this thing done. Finally, he gets it done in 2011. Obviously, that was the year that the first year that LeBron was with the Heatles in Miami, and they went to the finals and they lost. But, you know, Dirk, finals MVP that year, and he did his thing. It's just, so what Draymond is saying, that he doesn't feel like the European stars get held to the same level of scrutiny, I'm not so sure. And I think there's some factors involved there. I think the pressure correlates to two things, right? So the biggest European stars that we have in the league right now, obviously Giannis. So he's won, so he's kind of alleviated some of that pressure, but Giannis puts pressure on himself. He's extremely hungry. You can see it. He wants to win again. Now you have Nikola Jokic, who's a two-time defending NBA MVP, and he's possibly in line for his third. And I think there was a straw poll recently, a couple of weeks ago, and 70% of voters said that they'd vote Giannis for his third straight. Now, this is interesting to me because Larry Bird won 3 straight. He was the last person to do so. That was in the mid-'80s. I want to say 84, 85, 86 was his 3-year stretch, absolutely dominant. And that was a 9-year stretch in which he was top 5 every year. But anyway, Jokic, if you're looking from a historical perspective, like, should he really be a 3-time straight MVP? And he hasn't even gotten to the finals yet. Not even so much not winning, but he hasn't even gotten his team to the finals. Now, the flip side of that argument is, if you voted Jokic MVP the past 2 years, and this year his numbers are even better and his team is better, you know, his team is back and forth with Milwaukee for the best record in the league, and he's averaging a triple-double, which I don't think we've never seen a center do before. So, and I think he's got 100 career triple-doubles now, which is kind of crazy. But with that said, the triple-double stat, it does not at all mean what it used to, because as I constantly talk about, the offensive production is inflated in today's NBA. But anyway, yeah, so Jokic, he's starting to feel the pressure now. But to Draymond's point, you're not quite hearing it the same way when it comes to Jokic. Luka Doncic, one of the most decorated European players ever. Some people argue he's the best player ever in Europe, okay? He's been playing pro ball, I want to say, since he was 14 or 15 in Europe. And he comes over here. He's doing his thing. He's currently leading the league in scoring. And every year, people pick him before the season as the MVP favorite. He's probably not going to win it this year again, but he's a heck of a player. So you look at Luka, you look at Jokic, and you're saying, okay, well, why is no one really banging on these guys to win a championship? So I think a couple of the factors have to do with individual accomplishments, media pressure, and age, right? So Jokic is a little older. Luka, I think, is still only 24. Again, I kind of got to drop Giannis out of this because he won already, so he relieves some of that pressure. But Luka's still young. He's only been to the conference finals 1 time, and part of it is the way he plays and him having to learn, like a lot of the other all-time greats had to learn. Maybe you can't do it all by yourself. You need to let go of some of those stats and some of those numbers, better ingratiate your teammates, and then you'll have an opportunity to win. And part of that also is Mark Cuban and that Dallas front office putting a little more help around Luka. So we'll see how that goes. They've got Kyrie right now, but obviously that team can't defend at all because you got your two primary guys on offense, Luka and Kyrie. Neither one of them wants to defend. It's not a great defensive team statistically. And then you also have the issue of when it comes down to pressure situations late in games, is it going to be Kyrie? Is it going to be Luka? Who knows, right? So anyway, you've got the individual accomplishments. You've got the media pressure. Those are kind of two factors that are directly correlated, in my estimation, to how much pressure gets put on these stars. Now, here's the thing. As in most things in life, in America and maybe throughout the world, maybe there's a racial component. Giannis was held to that standard as soon as he won a title. He's a black player. Embiid, interestingly enough, hasn't won an MVP and obviously hasn't won a championship, but no one's really mentioning him. Now, we kind of lump him in with the Europeans, even though he's from Africa. So he's not because Africa's European, but because we just say we kind of tend to think of the best foreign-born players in the NBA as being European, right? So Embiid is that guy. He's a monster. I think he's second in the league in scoring. He's averaging 33, 10.5 rebounds, and he's just getting busy. But him and James Harden just may not be enough because the Bucks and the Celtics are both clearly better in the East. But who knows? We'll see come playoff time. But Embiid is having a tremendous year. If it was me, last year Embiid would have been MVP. This year it's going to be really hard for him to beat out Jokic, with Jokic averaging a triple-double, as we mentioned. So Embiid is kind of, they haven't started leaning on him yet. I think as soon as he wins an MVP, it's over. They're really going to start leaning on him. But then the other thing too is you're going to start wondering at some point, why is it that Embiid has had talent around him, but the talent keeps leaving? At some point, you're going to start wondering about the common denominator, which is Embiid. Can people play with him? Is he a guy that can lead a team? We don't know yet. So it's going to be interesting to see in terms of him when they're really going to start heaping that pressure on him to win a championship. So that's something that you kind of got to look at. But Embiid is kind of younger in his career because if we remember, he missed his first 2 seasons in the league due to injury. He didn't even play at all. So I think part of the interesting things we got to look at is that a lot of times in the past, the European players, as good as they may have been overseas, they came to the NBA and they weren't the team leader or the absolute best player on the team. A lot of times they were role players or they were like a number 2. Because even if you look at a guy like Drazen Petrovic, who was an incredible shooting guard, Kenny Anderson was an all-star with the Nets when Drazen Petrovic was there. Derek Coleman was, the second or third best power forward in the league, right? So third or second team All-NBA. So he couldn't necessarily be the guy to lead the team. And then, of course, there's also the factor of it's often difficult for foreign players to come over to the United States and take over a team because of, cultural differences and them still kind of learning about America, living in America, the American athletic mindset. It's difficult for them to walk in and be the leader of a team when they didn't grow up in the environment and really know how it's done. Now, Giannis, I think, is able to be the leader of the Bucks because the Bucks organization and the players on that franchise have seen how he has worked and built himself and developed his game to be the dominant player that he is. So he is able to lead by example. And also, he came over here very young, so he kind of, to some extent, grew up in America. We get that. But yeah, this is just a really interesting thought. And to some extent, Draymond is right that the foreign-born stars aren't quite held to the same level of scrutiny. Part of that, maybe in my estimation, is also that they are, even though they're here and some of them may have been here for some years now, they're still not originally from our basketball culture, so they kind of get a pass. And then especially the Europeans are not expected to be the best players in the league or the best players on their team, even though we're starting to see that happen more and more. So what I want to know from you is, do you think Draymond is right when he says that European stars aren't held to the same level of scrutiny for not winning as American stars are? Go ahead, leave your comments in the comment section, and can't wait to get back to you next time. And I'm out. Peace.